Okay, thank you. This is Andrew McDowell again, with an introduction to transpersonal um, approaches in coaching. So, in the unit applied positive psychology in coaching, a large proportion of the material is drawn from the area of transpersonal psychology and transpersonal coaching. And some of the names that you may be familiar with, if we start at the bottom, is positive psychology, Martin Seligman. Really, what in recent years, since the late 80s and early 90s, there's been the scientific study of many of the ideas from transpersonal psychology. So positive psychology has really been focused on the importance of the inner state and the outer experience and how those two areas are connected. But it wasn't until that more scientific study of some of the ideas, which we now refer to as positive psychology, that before that there were many authors and psychologists who had a lot of things to say about very similar things, but there wasn't the evidence base behind them. So people like Viktor Frankl, who many of you will have heard about, wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and how important it was as a survival mechanism to have a sense of coherence in life and to find how life made sense if there was a reason for living. That compelled people to keep going even in the most difficult of circumstances. Abraham Maslow, earlier than that, wrote about self-actualization and peak experiences. The need to feel fulfilled in life was very, very important for the work of Carl Jung. And a lot of the models that Jung created and approaches that he was working with were very orientated towards fulfillment and purpose. And prior to all of that, and one of the founders of transpersonal psychology, in fact, was Dr. Roberto Assagioli, an Italian psychiatrist originally, who was very interested in the human experience and was very interested in what was emerging for people. And he wrote very famously, the potential is not static. It's always trying to emerge. And many of the ideas of coaching are directly influenced by that perspective. The potential is waiting there, waiting to unfold, waiting to emerge. So, as I said before, in more recent years, positive psychology has created an evidence base for much of the thinking of these theorists, these authors and psychologists, who are coming more from the field of transpersonal and humanistic psychology. So if we think into what a transpersonal approach is all about, we can think about this as being in the realm of qualities and values, breaking the word down, trans meaning above or across, beyond or through. So transpersonal really being the search for something which is beyond the personal. So it's not just about me, it's about how the me fits with the we. So how do I relate to bigger concepts, something beyond just myself, something which is through my existence, my experience, and those of my fellow human beings having that experience. So it's really about looking at what matters, what's important for people. How do we find meaning beyond just our personal individual experiences? And this is something that, people across cultures, across belief systems, all have tried to do. It's what makes a good life, what helps people make sense of their existence, what myths and belief systems have we developed. Often this is about trying to make sense of our own existence in relation to what's beyond just our personal experience. And of course, this is something we don't talk about very much, and it gets quite personal for people. And it's often also in the space of religions and spirituality, but that's but that's not what we're really approaching it from in this experience. We're really looking at the fact that human beings do need or do seem to have an innate capacity or need um, to want to have a sense of meaning, to need to have sense of direction or purpose in their lives, or to need to have a feeling of connection, and for their own existence to extend beyond just the simple transactional perceptions and relationships. People want to have something deeper, something more meaningful to talk about, and this is the realm of the transpersonal. And again, it's not an exact world. It's not an easy one to get your head around. And Assagioli, who was one of I guess the people that really began the modern reflection around this kind of material, was very, very keen to say and to help people understand that it's not the truth. So we're not, with this, we're really not trying to say this is the way it is, or this is the way it should be. In Assagioli's view, it was very much more of a this is the map, not the territory kind of approach. It's about trying things on, seeing how it fits your experience. And he famously said that if it doesn't make sense, just throw it away. If it makes sense, accept it, and if it doesn't, throw it away. And he said again that life can be an adventure for people. Famously, he said, life, there's no certainty, there's only the adventure. And if we do see the models as the truth, then life is a tragedy. So it's not the model that matters. It's about trying to find a way to make sense of people's experience. And it's very much in the realm of Marcel Proust's point, that we don't just receive the wisdom. It doesn't just get offered to us. We have to discover it for ourselves. So in the transpersonal psychologist's approach, people are on a journey, and it's about trying to work out what's meaningful for yourself, rather than just accepting a model. So from a coaching point of view, in the transpersonal approach to coaching, there's a big focus on values. So there's a lot of talk about trying to help people get a sense of what's important to them in terms of their values. Coaching from a transpersonal approach also is around helping people get a sense of being aligned to their potential, so that there's some potential that's emerging for them, and finding alignment to that there's some sort of a pull, some sort of inner knowing, sort of drawing out the inner knowing with someone. So a transpersonal coach would spend a lot of time trying to help someone unpack a sense of what's pulling them towards their potential, and a focus on really supporting someone to be empowered towards taking action towards that. So building the sense of intrinsic motivation and self-belief to expressing that sense of knowing about their potential, to be empowered through that. The transpersonal approach also involves more holistic conversations. So it's not, in a lot of coaching, the focus is more cognitive and behavioral. In a transpersonal approach, a coach would focus on felt sensation, the body. They'd be very much interested in cognition and imagination, emotions, so feelings aspect is highly valued, as is the sense of spirituality for someone. So the deeper important elements for someone's life, the longing towards expressing something, the values that they feel aligned to, some sort of qualities that they want to express in their lives, become very, very much part of the conversation. There's also that sense of emergence and a learning about oneself. So entering into a transpersonal approach with coaching is very much around looking at not just solving the problem, but seeing what's emerging and seeing what could be growing for someone in their experience. And all of it is focused around this idea that a problem is inherently an opportunity for some growth or potential. So a transpersonal approach to coaching looks at any kind of pathology, any sort of problem, containing some inherent possibility for growth. Now, I know that sounds very idealistic. I know not every problem is good. It's not what I said. It's looking at reframing the pathology as containing the potential for growth, not just saying problem is a good problem because without the problem you wouldn't grow, but it's looking at investigating, looking at that problem as containing some sort of impetus towards growth. Okay. Now, one of the areas in transpersonal work is the area of a transpersonal experience, and this is where a lot of people make connection with the idea of the transpersonal. They make sense of the transpersonal. Now, sometimes people call these peak experiences. Abraham Maslow wrote a lot about it. In more recent years, Walsh and Vaughan wrote that a transpersonal experience is where people have a sense of identity, or their sense of identity extends beyond their individual experience to encompass a wider aspect of humankind, life, psyche, or cosmos. So they're right out there. But it's those times where we're not just aware of ourselves, but we're aware of the bigger picture. Okay? And the fact that human beings do that tells us that there's more going on than just we're not just individual experiences, but there is some sort of collective reality that we connect into. So Maslow wrote about this same concept in terms of peak experiences and talked about having a sense of unity or ultimate truth, where we have a sense of wonder or awe. So you could ask yourself, have you ever felt in touch with that in your life? Have you ever felt in contact with a sense of unity, or have you ever looked at a sunset and felt in awe in a certain way, or ever saw a scene of suffering and felt your heart go out to people that you never knew, or you never have met before, or you never would? What is it that compels us to do that? What is it that compels us to have our experience extend beyond just our individual personal worlds, but to be interconnected to others or to a wider system? We can experience the transpersonal not only in these kind of big magical kind of experiences, but also in the suffering through the more imminent experiences in the here and now. Famously the Buddha saying of, after enlightenment, chop wood, or wash the dishes. So you can get a sense of connection in the everyday. It's not just these bigger picture kind of transcendent experiences, it's also in the imminent experiences. So sometimes people feel a connection through suffering just as much as they do through a sense of transcending. Okay, so there'll be more that we talk about this during the workshop, but this is just, I guess, to get you thinking at some level. Characteristics of peak experiences: there's a sense of rightness. So you could think about times where you've had that sense of rightness or grace, where you've had some point of inner knowing, some surprise or aha experience, or a point of unity. And I guess the reason we're talking about this is that coaching is really about helping people unpack potential, and transpersonal psychology is saying that actually this potential that people have access to is vast. And if we can help people regularly connect into that vastness, to that sense of um, their consciousness or their experience extending beyond just their own personal experience, but into something bigger, this can be a very powerful reservoir of energy for them to draw on, and to fuel the emergence of their potential. So just as a bit of a summary, and again, we'll go into this more during the workshop. There are some hypotheses of a transpersonal approach which we think are important just to think into. So one is this idea of wisdom being within the individual or within the system. And James Hillman wrote a book around acorn theory at some point. And this might sound a bit strange, but it's pointing to the idea that within the acorn is the map and the potential, in fact, to be the oak tree. So, the acorn doesn't need anyone to tell it how to be an oak tree. It kind of just knows. And we could take that idea into our thinking around using a transpersonal approach in our coaching. So the person has a map. There is something for them to tap into that knows what they're meant to grow into. If they're an acorn, they're going to grow into an oak tree. Not all oak trees are the same, but they kind of know how to get there. They're not going to grow into a pine tree or an elm or some other kind of tree. So the one of the fundamental ideas behind transpersonal are that people are okay. They do have some map inside that they can tap into, and our job is to help them tap into it as coaches. It's also that what people experience in their life is meaningful. It's not just random. And there are experiences that we do have meaning and purpose, and can be helpful in helping us unpack the unfolding purpose that people experience. A transpersonal coach would also look at the relationship between how I'm feeling in my inner world and what I am experiencing in the outer world. And in fact, that there is some dynamic and relationship to experience with that. With that in mind, there is some sort of evolutionary process in place. Now, again, this is very debatable. It's a hypothesis rather than the truth in any way. So I wouldn't try to argue or prove that to someone. It's just more of a position that we can take, which is adaptive and useful to think about from a coaching perspective. So, we could look at someone and say there's no evolution, but if that's the case, then there's no point in growing. But we can look at it and say, well, there is some evolutionary process in place here. And if we make sense of our lives, if we make sense of the inner world and the outer world, and in fact, those events do have meaning and purpose in our unfoldment, then that's another way that we can think about how someone's developing and growing. With that in mind, from a transpersonal approach, we also would say that potential unfolds as we're ready. So it unfolds itself slowly and as we're ready, because we've done the work in order for us to make sense of what we're experiencing. I guess the other element, and many of the approaches and the techniques that come from working with more of a transpersonal lens, is that the unconscious that we all have an unconscious part of our lives. The unconscious is a precious, useful area that holds very important information that through various transpersonal techniques, various approaches, we can help unpack and help people to draw on as they explore what's unfolding and emerging for them. So again, it's a little bit complex and perhaps abstract at some level, but we hope to offer you this now to get you thinking before the workshop, when you can actually ask questions, engage with this, and look at how you can actually put it into action through your coaching. I hope this has been a useful introduction. Thank you.